Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Stephen Albert, and I work with the Institute for Bird Populations. We're a small nonprofit based out of the North Bay area in California, although I work from my remote office in New Mexico. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about some of the bird monitoring that we've been doing on military bases over the past couple years. I'd first like to thank my co-authors for the various studies that went into the presentation, including Chris Ray, Danielle Kaschube, and Lynn Schofield of the Institute for Bird Populations, Jesse Schillaci at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Andrew Satterwhite at Fort A.P. Hill, Virginia, and Richard Keith, Brenda Keith, and John Brenneman at the Kalamazoo Nature Center, who have been working at the Fort Custer Training Center for many years. IBP primarily works with birds. We've been doing that since about 1989, although we do work with other taxa, but birds are really ideal environmental barometers. They're abundant in the environment, so they're relatively easy to see. They inhabit most habitats. They're vocal and they're diurnal, so they're easy to enumerate and census and track the trends in. They have a medium longevity, so it's relatively easy to get population demographics such as annual productivity, lifetime survival, annual survival, things like that. They have a rapid metabolism, so they tend to reflect changes that are going on in the environment. They have a relatively high trophic position, same deal there. Because they're relatively high up on the food chain, they tend to reflect changes that are going on in the environment with the stuff that they're eating, whether that's vegetative matter or insects or small mammals. And people love them, which make it easy to find people to work on some of these bird projects and become really, really accomplished birders. Over the past couple of years, we've primarily worked with two different types of monitoring on the military bases on which we're working. Demographics, which is the study of populations to try to get at the reasons for population decline. And I'm going to talk about the MAPS program, the Monitoring Avian Productivity and Survivorship Program, in a minute. But basically, demographics, the way that we do it with passive mist netting is it works in a relatively small area, about a 10-hectare area, in which we set up a series of mist nets, capture and ban birds, and take down all kinds of demographic information and morphometric information and body condition information. It's a very good method for looking at the age, sex, the reproductive status of birds, to get at things like population structure, to try to figure out what exactly is going on with the population at the local level. And it's also a good way of checking birds for health. Lots of things that you can't get from just having a bird in the hand. But some of the limitations are that you can only work in a relatively small area, and you need a fairly distinct skill set that takes years of training to become really proficient at. The other type of monitoring that we often do is point counts. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, in which you set up a transect or a series of areas in which you go, you sit quietly, and you count all the birds that you see and hear. And it's great for detecting species. You can usually get the sex of the bird. Sometimes you can get the age, not always. It's a great way of looking at trends in population density or trends in relative abundance. And this last question is something that I'm going to talk in much more detail about, because it tends to be one of the limitations of point counts in general, that it's hard to get trends in density. Just seeing a certain number of birds doesn't tell you that much about their overall density, unless you do some pretty fancy modeling, which we've been able to develop, especially with the help of my colleague, Chris Ray. So jumping back to the demographics, IBP initiated the Monitoring Avian Productivity and Survivorship Program in 1989. It's a continent-wide program of passive mist netting. We have cooperators all over the country in almost every state of the union and almost every Canadian province. And it's a series of passive mist nets where our cooperators will use their volunteer labor or the labor of the organization that they're working for, and mist net and ban birds, and hopefully, get a recapture of that bird later in its life cycle, or maybe even at a different point in its life cycle at another station. The purpose of the program is to understand the when, where, and why of species decline. If you don't know where in the annual cycle the pinch point is for a population, if a population is declining because of factors due to productivity, then it's most likely something that's happening on the breeding grounds in North America. If it's something that looks like it's due to annual survival that's most affecting a population, then it's quite likely something that's on the wintering grounds in Latin America. So basically, we're trying to look at the demographics of a population to figure out where conservation resources can most help the population. Since the program was established more than 30 years ago, the program has had 1,300 stations. Those are the gray and green dots. About 350 of them are active. Those are the green dots. And we've gathered more than 2 million demographic records from birds. And IBP scientists and our many colleagues have published over 100 papers. Basically, again, to reiterate, what we're doing with the MAPS program is we're looking at individual birds, the age, sex, reproductive status, body condition, morphometrics, and movement patterns to try to get at trends within the population, the abundance, demographics, and other vital rates like productivity, survival, recruitment, which is the point at which a young bird enters the breeding population. We look at spatial structure, how they're using the habitat, and we look at migratory connectivity, where specific populations breed in relation to where they winter. Over the course of the 30 years, the DoD has been a great partner in the MAPS program. More than 60 installations have had more than 160 MAP stations on them. Obviously, some stations have more than one. Some have 5 or 6 MAP stations. Many have one. The work that we're doing at Fort A.P. Hill right now, we have 4 stations there. And we're trying to work with the DoD on to meet the objectives of the MAPS program and to meet DoD management objectives, which is to balance conservation and land management, provide to support decision tools, see how bird communities react in response to changes to habitat, and of course support military readiness and other mission objectives. Here's just really quickly a list of some of the 60 properties that have been involved with the MAPS program. If you're interested, if you're at one of these installations and you're interested in seeing your historic MAPS data or your current MAPS data, or you're interested in rejoining the MAPS program, please let me know. We're having a push right now to try to expand the MAPS program in North America. So my email contact is at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to shoot me an email. One of our longest running programs has been at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. For a number of years, we ran several MAP stations over there, but we wanted to try to combine MAPS and point count monitoring to try to get at those differences in the way we look at bird populations that I sort of intimated at with the slide that showed the 2 different types of monitoring, demographics and point counts. So we have a pretty good idea from the years of work over there, what's going on with the demographics, with productivity and survivorship. But that doesn't tell us much about the trends in bird population over time. So in the last couple of years, we've instituted a series of point counts all across the base in every habitat. Working with Jesse Schillaci over there, the primary objective is to see what's going on with songbird populations in response to the intensive management that they're doing for the red-cockaded woodpecker. As you know, a great success story, the species was recently downlisted. I can't remember, downlisted or delisted, either one of those. It was reduced from endangered status due to the successful efforts of habitat restoration and population monitoring. So it's a great success story. But to keep the habitat the way that the species prefers, the ground needs to get burned on about a 3-year cycle. So there's a lot of prescribed burn that goes on over the base. And Jesse and some of the base managers were just curious as to what effects that's having on populations of other songbirds, which is why we instituted the point counts. So we've been doing the point counts for about 4 years. Here are some of the preliminary results. This is a graph showing species and the abundance of detections by species. As you can see, with species like pine warbler, pretty abundant. We've detected them close to 2,000 times, and going down through great crested flycatcher, mourning dove, and all the species all the way down to some that we just detect a couple of times. Here is a look at the trends in those species over the 4 years that we've been doing the point counts. These are the 4-digit abbreviations that birders and banders use. For instance, yellow-billed cuckoo, common nighthawk, red-headed woodpecker, etc. And as you can see, most of the species have a pretty flat curve, which is great, meaning that populations are relatively stable. A couple go up and down a little bit. Pine warblers seem to drop a bit in the second year of the surveys that we're doing. Not sure why. Other populations, such as red-headed woodpecker, are seeming to go up. And I should make that distinction, actually, not that the populations are going up, but the number of detections are going up. So that brings me to a great point. How do we make inferences from just the number of detections to see what's actually happening with the population? Because it's actually a much more complicated question than it might seem initially, because there are a lot of, when you're out there surveying for a bird, and 90% of the detections that we get are done by ear, the call or the song of a bird. It's only about 10% of the species that you actually see, especially in a forested place like Fort Bragg. But there are a lot of things that affect how detectable a bird is. One, of course, being ambient noise. Is it rainy or windy, or is there traffic noise going on? What's the topography? Are you on the top of a hill with a clear view and a clear soundscape around you in 360 degrees, or are you in the bottom of a valley surrounded by hills? Is the bird loud or quiet? Does it really sing out like a woodpecker, like a flicker you can hear from half a mile away or more, or is it just kind of twittering in the understory like a bush tit or something like that? Is it shy or gregarious? When a human shows up, some birds will immediately begin singing. Some birds will immediately be quiet based on the behavior of the surveyor. Is it a canopy or an understory bird? Is a bird sitting on the top of the tree singing, or is it kind of skulking around in the understory like a towhee and not making very much noise at all? And of course, how far away you are from the bird makes a difference. Obviously, if you just count the birds that are close to you, and you're going to miss the birds that are far away, it makes a difference in how you calculate the density. So all these factors go into some modeling that we've developed at IBP. We take all these things into account to develop density models. And so this is a look at the first 3 years of data from the Fort Bragg for a number of species, about 25 species for which we had robust enough data to develop actual density estimates. And I want to emphasize that again. These are not trend estimates. These are actual densities of birds. And again, you see, it's probably the curves are probably similar to the detection rates, but it's a very important distinction because you can't just assume that what you're measuring is density. So most of the species stay pretty stable. A few like like pine warbler, as we saw before, go up and down. Moving on to the work that we're doing at Fort AP Hill. We had some map stations there, the demographic monitoring and bird bedding stations there about 10 years ago. Due to funding constraints, the station stopped operating, but recently the fort and Andrew Satterwhite got some more funding. So we've reopened the map stations. And we're looking at, detections of and demographics of DoD mission-sensitive species. I should mention that in the first year of the program, we ran both point counts and map stations, but we've changed now to just running the map stations. And here's a look at some of the data we were able to get off of the point counts that we did before. Again, looking at these mission-sensitive species, the darker the red means it was more detections at that point. So you can sort of look at that as if they were hotspots for that mission-sensitive species, prairie warbler in this case. So if that's an important bird for the base to be able to protect and manage and improve habitats for, we have a nice little map showing where the most detections of that species were, so they can mitigate any activities or maybe stay out of those areas during the nesting season, etc. And the final program that I wanted to talk about was some work that our colleagues at the Kalamazoo Nature Center Rich and Brenda Keith primarily, have been doing with the Army National Guard of Michigan at the Fort Custer Training Center near Kalamazoo. And we have a lot going on. They've been running a map station for about 20 years. They've been doing point counts for about 20 years. So that we have about a huge report that I just wanted to share one little peek into. This is some neat information that we got from the habitat mapping and the habitat data that were taken. The different color circles represent the different habitats where the points from the point counts were done. Oak being the most abundant habitat, you can see here by a number of acres, and the green circles are where birds were detected in oak, hardwoods, the red circles, etc. But another thing to notice here is the size of the circles indicate that more birds were seen at that point, more birds of all species, not just red-headed woodpecker, but or red-naped sapsucker. Birds of all types. So you look over here and you see the biggest circles are in the wetlands, indicating that those are probably the most biodiverse areas. At least that's where the most detections of birds took place. The yellow grassland circles are also pretty big, indicating a pretty good number of detections. And then the other circles, the oak, the walnut, and some of those other sort of just about average size compared to the other habitats. That's about all I have. I guess what I want to leave you with is we're really enthusiastic about working on DoD lands. We love the work that we're doing with the DoD, and we have the ability to customize our monitoring, whether it's point counts, whether it's demographic monitoring, whether it's a combination, whether it's single species monitoring, where we just started getting into autonomous recording units, ARUs, and we have several projects going in the West about that. We'd love to talk to you about the types of things that autonomous recording units can do. Those are little units that record at certain preset times of the day. For instance, you can start, you can say you want to record from sunrise to 9 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 3 months. You can program the ARU to do something like that. And then you take that back to the office and you run through some algorithms and you do some hand annotation and find out what birds you have. I'd be happy to email, I'd be happy to answer any questions via email. My email is listed there. And thank you very much for your time.